Hello, friends. Welcome to another episode of our discussion on Islamic radicalism and religious terrorism. This is your host, Adnan Qaiser, with part 13 of our discussion. This is segment B, in which we'll link our discussion of segment A, in which we have been trying to examine the death of Daesh leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi in the larger concept of terrorism in the world, which had been unleashed by Daesh. You're aware that we are in the larger context of this debate. We are trying to understand what constitutes and try to de-link the faith of Islam from any kind of violence or religious terrorism, for that matter. So Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi, ladies and gentlemen, had been a charismatic leader. He had been an eloquent speaker, carrying a larger than life persona through his online image building. He achieved what no other jihadist leader could ever achieve. Even Al-Qaeda's Osama bin Laden could not match al-Baghdadi's credentials. Not only that, he founded and established the so-called Islamic State and a caliphate in the Arab heartland that stretched over 88,000 square kilometers from Mosul in Iraq to Raqqa in Syria. But Daesh under him took terror's barbarity and its video publicity to new heights of insanity and barbarity and gruesomeness. As I had told you guys, that through this jihadist online propaganda and publication section I discussed earlier, Daesh and al-Baghdadi revolutionized the use of different social media platforms for recruitment purposes, as well as to disseminate extremist propaganda and to instill fear among the people. Under al-Baghdadi's Islamic Caliphate, Daesh, ladies and gentlemen, had galvanized some 41,490 foreign fighters from 80 different countries. According to some claim it is 50, but there are some claims about 80, including 32,809 men, 4,761 women, and 4,640 children, who had traveled from across the four corners of the world to join Daesh so-called holy war in Iraq and Syria. Al-Baghdadi, although could not pull a 911 type of attack on a foreign soil, he remained instrumental in inspiring and directing the highest number of terror attacks against the Western people. However, al-Baghdadi's death does not mean the death of Daesh or Islamic State, for that matter. So since the territorial losses in the Middle East, Daesh has focused now on a warfare of narratives and ideological supremacy, underlining the imperativeness of the will to wage the war rather than winning the war. The will to wage the war rather than winning the war. Moreover, ladies and gentlemen, you might have noticed that President Trump had publicly ridiculed and berated al-Baghdadi's killing, or what had been actually al-Baghdadi's suicide, in his televised address on October 27, 2019, which had been largely seen as his re-election campaign. President Trump called al-Baghdadi sick, depraved, and vicious, whose life ended like a dog. Al-Baghdadi's suicide has, although eliminated the self-proclaimed Caliph from the jihadist scene, forcing his so-called global caliphate's warriors to hide underground, detained in prison camps, or running around to save their lives and limbs. Rebuking an enemy's ego always generates a more ferocious and angry response. In my military career, it had been taught, ladies and gentlemen, that no matter how ridiculous, clumsy, or jittery your enemy is, Never in your disdain try to rub his ego the wrong way. For then he not only becomes more ruthless and aggressive, but also tends to take more risks and becomes reckless, dangerous, and even suicidal. So such a raging enemy may bring more harm to your own forces. So in warfare, ladies and gentlemen, military strategists teach their soldiers two fundamental principles of fighting. Number one, never underestimate your enemy, may it be his intentions or his capability. Number two, never rebuke or ridicule your adversary, no matter how naive or ridiculous he may be. It is not a soldierly act to mock or make fun of your enemy. You may think that by doing so, you're forcing him to make a wrong move under emotional fury or pressure. That could cause a lack of judgment or lowering of his guards on his part. But by making a mockery of your enemy, one, you undermine your own integrity, high moral standing, and prestige in the conflict, and bring into question your own values, your valor, and your principles for which you are fighting in the first place. So secondly, by degrading or dehumanizing your enemy, you unnecessarily hurt and annoy his ego. Your enemy, who might have already been vanquished, may find renewed vigor, resolve, and motivation to keep fighting and against you. And this time, mind you, he would be more lethal, more energetic, and more dangerous because you have needlessly provoked his ego and damaged his pride and gave him a reason to keep fighting. Mr. Trump unfortunately did the same thing to Daesh when he sarcastically announced the death of the leader Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi on October 27, 2019. In his opinion piece, which was published in Lawfare as well as published by the Brookings Institute on October 29, 2019, Daniel Byman, he's a senior fellow foreign policy at the Center for Middle East Policy, he noted, and I wish to quote, "Unfortunately, even in the moment of genuine triumph, the president could not resist meandering remarks, inappropriate asides, and distortions of his own record. The eventual tone of Trump's remarks diminished the solemnity of the moment. This could have been a signature moment for the president, giving him a chance to give a powerful message of purpose and unity. Instead, Trump gloated al-Baghdadi died like a dog. He died like a coward, and that he spent his last moments in utter fear, in total panic and dread, terrified of the American forces bearing down on him." Byman continued to castigate, "I hope all that is true. But of course, there is no way to know Baghdadi's feelings as he faced imminent death. And such boastful speculations is unworthy of the seriousness these events deserve." Trump's speech and his subsequent responses to reporters' questions also meandered, with the president repeating himself and bringing in the Muslim ban, among other issues. He called the terrorists losers and frightened puppies, language more suitable for playground rather than the White House, unquote. As President Trump drew criticism from all and sundry for his uncalled for and inappropriate remarks at the death of al-Baghdadi, the chairman of the upper house of the Russian's parliament, Foreign Affairs Committee, Konstantin Kosochev, He also derided Mr. Trump's comments by stating to the Russia's Interfax news agency, and please pay attention to his words, ladies and gentlemen, as they second my thoughts about terrorism. Last respects have been paid to Al-Baghdadi at least 5 times in the past. Continued terrorism, countering terrorism is a much more difficult task than physical destruction of its leaders, even the most irreconcilable. Unsurprisingly, Daesh militant group also took no time to find a replacement and to announce a new leader. But they also vowed revenge in return for al-Baghdadi's loss. Revenge, ladies and gentlemen, remains an intrinsic part of tribal cultures and societies. So while confirming al-Baghdadi's death, the terror organizations immediately named Abu Ibrahim al-Hashimi al-Qurayshi as its new leader on November 1st, 2019. Please note, ladies and gentlemen, that al-Hashmi also adopted the nom de guerre of al-Quraysh, which I had told you earlier was meant to associate with Prophet Muhammad's tribe, may peace be upon him, and gain legitimacy and recognition in the Muslim world. So secondly, the purpose of attaching such lineage is to present a warrior scholar image of the new Caliph as Amirul Mu'minin, or the leader of the righteous, who carries the credentials of both jihad or war fighting, as well as an alim-e-din or a religious scholar, to claim veneration from his followers. So al-Hashmi predecessor al-Baghdadi, actual kunyat was Abu Dua. And however, I had told you earlier that before taking over the leadership of Daesh in 2010, the self-proclaimed Caliph also changed his lineage to Al-Quraysh, just to gain legitimacy. Taking offense of President Trump's derogatory affront, portraying al-Baghdadi as having died like a dog after running into a dead-end tunnel, whimpering and crying and smearing all the way. Daesh spokesperson named Sheikh Abu Hamza al-Quraysh retorted back by calling President Trump a crazy old man. Swearing revenge and getting its fighters freed from Syrian and Iraqi prisons, the spokesperson warned, "Do not rejoice, America. The new chosen one will make you forget the horror you have beholden and make the achievements of the Baghdadi days taste sweet." Thus, you can see for yourself, ladies and gentlemen, that terror is not going to give us any respite or depart from this region anytime sooner. However, as I have stated earlier, the West lacks proper understanding about these Muslim terror groups. Having personally listened to many debriefings by the NATO military commanders boasting about killing hundreds and thousands of Afghan Taliban, who ironically speaking had been labeled as terrorists until the signing of a peace agreement between the United States and the Taliban on February 29, 2020. So the commanders also claimed of killing several Al-Qaeda fighters in Afghanistan as well as in the Middle East. But has the terror been defeated? Regretfully, they have no answer to that. So it is my considered opinion, ladies and gentlemen, that until the Western countries continue to believe in the physical elimination of the terrorists like Osama bin Laden and al-Baghdadi, without understanding or trying to address the underlying causes of radicalization, religious terrorism, or violence, this terrorism cannot be brought to an end. So thus, despite some successes here and there, no prescription has so far worked, and no remedy is likely to work, because the diagnosis so far remains faulty. First, the Taliban, a nationalistic character, with no intention of threatening anyone in the world, had not been taken into account. They were conveniently declared pariahs and terrorists, only to be now pleaded for a face-saving exit or withdrawal of troops from Afghanistan, besides supplicating them to engage in an intra-Afghan dialogue for peace in Afghanistan. However, the Western forces are leaving behind what is called as Daesh Walayat Khorasan, excuse me, the Islamic State in the Khorasan province. Excuse me. So they're leaving it as an unfinished business of the war in Afghanistan, which lasted for 19 years. So it speaks volumes about the Western powers' resolve and capability to fight and eradicate the menace of terror. Regarding Daesh Walayat Khorasan, I had told you earlier, ladies and gentlemen, about its links to the Prophet Muhammad, peace be upon him, his prophecy about Ghazwa-e-Hind, or the last battle of Islam to be fought in this region before the end of times take place. So I had also told you that Al-Qaeda had already formed one of its offshoots, which is known as Ansar Ghazwatul Hind. Ansar Ghazwatul Hind is also called as Al-Qaeda in the Indian subcontinent, or AQIS. Thus, it was too early for the US Defense Secretary Mark Esper to celebrate the killing of Al-Baghdadi, proclaiming the defeat and demise of Islamic State. On October 27, 2019, the Defense Secretary stated, and I wish to quote, "This is a great day for America and a great day for the world. Last night, US Joint Special Operations Forces and interagency partners flawlessly executed a commander-in-chief directed operation to capture or kill Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi. As a result, al-Baghdadi, who led the Islamic State of Iraq and Syria terrorist movement and inspired one of the most brutal and misguided terror campaigns in modern history, is dead at the hands of the United States forces. With our partners, we defeated the physical caliphate of ISIS earlier this year, and now the founder and leader is dead. This is a major victory for the enduring defeat ISIS mission. I want to commend those participating in and supporting the operation, America and partners alike, for a job well done." Unquote. However, people who understand the complexities of faith-driven terrorism, they know full well that just like killing Osama bin Laden, the elimination of al-Baghdadi will not purge the threat of radical Islamism. While applauding al-Baghdadi's death, the US chairman of the House Armed Services Committee, Representative Adam Smith, he cautioned, and I quote, "We must not mistake the demise of one ISIS leader for complete and finite victory. Many ISIS fighters remain in tenuous circumstances in the prisons of northeastern Syria. ISIS fighters in these prisons and around the world will not rest because of his death." Unquote. And the congressman is right, ladies and gentlemen, because since Daesh collapse and rout out declared in March 2019 in the remote eastern Syrian village of Baghouz, the organization went underground and reverted to the well-honed guerrilla warfare tactics that continues to bleed the region through Shakespearean death by 1,000 cuts, and continues to dog the world peace and security. And now a word about Daesh and the Taliban paradox. In my May 2020's study on Afghanistan, which I talked earlier, published by the South Asia Journal as well as the Geopolitics, after the signing of the peace deal between the United States and the Taliban on February 29, 2020. I had pointed out that although the Taliban have vowed not to allow any terror group to operate on the Afghan soil, they did not mention Al-Qaeda or Daesh by name. Thus, it remains unclear if these terror organizations would be allowed to survive in Afghanistan under the Pashtun tradition of Pashtun Wali, albeit in a low-key role. So, under the Pashtun Wali tradition, ladies and gentlemen, a Pashtun host is honor-bound to protect the life of his guest even at the peril of his own life or facing harm in return. Therefore, we saw the Taliban's then Amir Mullah Muhammad Umar bore the brunt and of his removal from the power, as well as 19-year-long war, long-drawn war against the international coalition forces, but refused to surrender Osama bin Laden after the 9/11 attacks, seeking concrete evidence or proof of his involvement in the 9/11 terror attacks. Here, ladies and gentlemen, I also wish to point out the Taliban's paradox. Not being an apologist for the Taliban, I have been duly condemning their brutal policies and harsh Islamic practices during Taliban's reign between 1996 and 2001. But I have held a firm view in several of my analysis papers on Afghanistan that were the Taliban granted any political accommodation in Afghanistan, Daesh or Islamic State could never have established its foothold in Afghanistan. Remember, in early 2015, Taliban's then deputy Amir or deputy leader, Mullah Akhtar Mansour, who later became Taliban's Amir on July 29, 2015, and was killed in a US drone attack on May 21st, 2016. He wrote a letter to Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi warning him to stay out of Afghanistan, because many of the Taliban fighters and young foot soldiers had started to break ranks from the Taliban and started to join Daesh in droves, either due to their convergence of ideologies or under the avarice of high remunerations. So, however, at the same time, we must not mistaken ourselves into believing that an Afghan Sunni nationalist movement named Taliban is not anti-Shiite in nature. Just like Daesh or Islamic State or Lashkar-e-Jhangvi al-Alami or Jundullah al-Alami and many others, Pashtun Taliban too carry great detestation towards Iran, towards the Shiite Iran, and towards Afghan Hazara community, as well as Tajik and Uzbek communities, which predominantly belong to the Shiite sect, and whose religious practices Taliban consider un-Islamic. So thus, disregarding terror, there remains some convergence in the ideology, outlook, and mindset between Taliban and Daesh. So that's the paradox which I wanted to highlight. So now a word about terror and regional geopolitics. It must be kept in mind, ladies and gentlemen, that Al-Baghdadi had been killed in the town of Barisha in the Syrian province of Idlib. Idlib is an area primarily controlled by Syrian rebel groups called National Liberation Front, as well as Al-Qaeda affiliate Huras al-Din and Hayat Tahrir al-Sham, or simply the HTS. So Hayat Tahrir al-Sham is the new name of the former al-Nusra Front, the Syrian arm of Al-Qaeda, which had been fighting in the Syrian civil war, which I had told you earlier, remains the strongest group, having battle-hardened fighters ranging between 12,000 and 15,000. With Hurasul Deens, another 3,500 to 5,000 fighters, they make up a sizable force to reckon with. Thus, anyone thinking that with the closing of Al-Baghdadi's chapter, the terrorism will come to an end, remains disconnected with the reality. So, former commander of the U.S. Central Command, General James Mattis, had warned in 2013 about the erroneous thinking about ending a war. On your terms, ending a war on your terms, and I wish to quote, he said, "We may think it over, but in fact the enemy gets a vote. No war is over until the enemy says it's over," unquote. So secondly, with the sudden announcement of withdrawal of U.S. forces from northeast Syria by President Trump on October 13, 2019, America has essentially handed over the fate of the region to Turkey as well as to Russia, to pursue their own political or geopolitical aims and ambitions in the larger ambit of power play or brinkmanship in the region. So the resultant commotion, turmoil, and the vacuum predictably led to the escape of a large number of Daesh detainees who, I had told you earlier, had been deliberately freed by the Syrian Kurds, but also by the Turkish-backed forces, such as the Syrian Democratic Front, or simply put, the SDF. So Syrian Democratic Force reportedly had many sympathizers and informers having ties with the extremist groups like Al-Qaeda and Daesh. So if you recall my initial submissions, ladies and gentlemen, I had told you folks about this terror phenomena having more like a political gimmickry, as well as a tug of war, if you will, or brinkmanship between state and non-state actors for their political ambitions and power, influence, and hegemony in the region. So it is plainly unfortunate that in doing so, the good name of the faith of Islam, which stands for benevolence, compassion, and mercy, has been soiled, sullied, and made controversial in return, apparently for no good reason. So regarding Daesh prisoners, please note, ladies and gentlemen, that the Syrian Kurds forces, as I said earlier, had kept nearly 12,000 Islamic State detainees along with their families, including children, in the northeastern part of Syria. However, it was later reported that the Kurds, who were fighting for their own independent homeland in Iraq, Syria, and Turkey, released many of the detainees after Turkey sent its own troops inside northern Syria on October 22nd, 2019, to create a buffer zone of some 30 kilometers by 300 kilometers along the Syrian-Turkish border, to house nearly 3.66 million registered Syrian refugees who had escaped to Turkey during the Syrian civil war. The Syrian civil war that started as part of the Arab Spring of 2011, ladies and gentlemen, is still ongoing even in its 9th year. Pretty unfortunate. So it is another complex debate how the United States, Turkey, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Iran, and the Kurds played geopolitics in the region for their own interests and influence. So meanwhile, the fate and the status of the Daesh prisoners, including more than 2,000 foreign fighters hailing from 50 or 80 different countries, remain unknown. The well-deserving end of Al-Baghdadi may be a milestone, ladies and gentlemen, in the global war against terror. But please note and be mindful that it does not mean the end of radicalization or religious terrorism for that matter. The fragmentation, franchising, and at times merging of Al-Qaeda and Daesh, and their evolution into several splinter groups, terror groups, extending from Yemen, Iraq, Libya, Afghanistan, Pakistan, and India, to Somalia, Libya, Sahel, and Nigeria only confirms one thing, that religious terrorism is festering fast. It should be a concern to all of us. As I have been highlighting all along in the past 12 episodes of this presentation, that without first understanding the root causes of religious or rebellion among a section of Muslim youth, and without addressing their political concerns and grievances, injustices, and even their misplaced or convoluted ideology, this inter and as well as intra-civilizational war or a conflict is not going to come to an end. With this, ladies and gentlemen, I come to the end of part 13 of our discussion on Islamic radicalism and religious terrorism. In the next segment, I had plans to give you the outline of Daesh, Vilayat Khorasan, but pretty much I have covered it in this segment. So maybe I'll conclude this whole presentation here, although I have a very important segment left to tell you about Samuel Huntington's theory about the clash between the West and Islam, which he had came out in his Clash of Civilization book in 1996. But anyway, I will try. As you can see, I'm in a moving stage, so I'll try to come back with the next part on Vilayat Khorasan, which is very important for you to know. But there might be a break, but I sincerely hope, ladies and gentlemen, that you have made something, gained some insight out of this presentation, which had been meant to do a few things. One, to de-link the faith of Islam from the religious terrorism or any kind of violence, to delegitimize. Number two, to delegitimize any form of religious terrorism or political violence. Number three, to put to rest a few myths that had been associated with the religion of Islam. And number four, to underline various factors associated with the Islamic radicalization or what you call religious terrorism. In Latin, they say that if you remove the cause, the effects will automatically disappear. So the day the root causes of Muslim unrest and their political grievances are addressed, mind you, there would be no terror. So until next time, ladies and gentlemen, grant leave to Adnan Qaiser. So with this, we come to conclude the presentation, and see you again. Until next time, take good care and bye for now.